Lead, discover, develop, deliver. The Air Force Research Laboratory leads the discovery, development, and delivery of warfighting technologies for our air, space, and cyber forces. Our scientists, researchers, and professionals reimagine what's possible, creating tomorrow's technology today. This pursuit of innovation delivers solutions for our warfighters' urgent needs, creating innovative new capabilities for the Air Force and Space Force. When others say it's impossible, we find a way. We are the Air Force Research Laboratory.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to AFRL Inspire. Today, we'll be giving you a glimpse inside the workforce of the lab through a TED Talk-style event we hope you'll find both entertaining and thought-provoking. AFRL Inspire is meant to bring us all together, to share lessons learned and celebrate our individual and collective achievements. Today's speakers will share inspiring stories and personal stories and make complex topics more accessible to all of us. I'm AFRL historian Darren Raspa, and I'm based out of our Phillips research site on Kirtland Air Force Base, a little PRS out there on the web. And I specialize in the history of space vehicles and directed energy, so spaceships and lasers, super cool stuff. And I'm in an extremely fortunate position because I get to write on all our programs across our directorates. And the organizational memory of our lab is extremely important.
Hello, my name is Jeff Duford, and I too am an AFRL historian. My areas of specialty include the history of air power technology, so airplanes, engines, munitions, and I'm also very interested in studying the history of Air Force rapid innovation. Now, as AFRL historians, Darren and I have two main jobs. One is to be the keepers of AFRL's story, and in that capacity, we answer myriad questions on a wide range of obscure topics. And then our other important job is to chronicle AFRL activities now. And we do that by researching, contextualizing, and writing detailed studies. And these studies are helpful both to current decision makers and future decision makers.
That's right. So why do we have a couple historians hosting this year's event, of all people? Jeff, why are we here, right? Why is history especially relevant this year? Well, in case you're not aware, it's the 75th anniversary of the United States Air Force, 75 years, absolutely incredible. And the theme for this year's event is Accelerate, Innovate, and Thrive. Realizing where we came from and where we're going, we can only do that by looking to the past. So between today's extraordinary talks, Jeff and I will be providing a little historical context for you and bringing up stories from the past to inspire our future. From medical lasers used to save lives, to fire retardant used to protect our property and precious natural resources, to GPS and cell phone technology you may be using to watch this show right now, the Air Force has developed some of humankind's most innovative technology. And two of the most innovative individuals from our history are General Hap Arnold and Dr. Theodore von Karman.
And General Hap Arnold is really one of the great leaders and heroes in the history of the U.S. Air Force. In fact, his service dates back to the very early days of military heavier-than-air flight. In fact, Hap Arnold learned how to fly right here in Dayton at the Wright Brothers Field in 1911. And Hap Arnold holds a unique place in our history. His service culminated in leadership of the U.S. Army Air Forces in World War II, and he is the Air Force's only five-star general. In many ways, he really was the father of the Air Force. And Hap Arnold is a type of leader who did absolutely incredible, amazing things, and one of those things was he understood the critical importance of technology and pairing military with scientists. And Darren, I think this is probably best exemplified by the relationship that he had with world-renowned physicist and aerospace engineer Theodore von Karman.
No, that's true, Jeff. General Arnold's military know-how was matched only by the genius of an immigrant from Eastern Europe who had the scientific knowledge and foresight to make what would become the United States Air Force and the Air Force Research Lab into the cutting-edge organizations they are today. Now, von Karman was one of these individuals, Jeff, and I'm sure there's some of us among the crowd today and online who is a tinkerer. He couldn't help it. And that was even when he was drafted into the Austro-Hungarian army to fight in World War I. Von Karman developed a tethered helicopter system. He figured out a better way for machine guns to fire through propeller blades of aircraft. And that was during his off hours in between fighting a war. Incredible stuff. So after the war, it's the 1930s, the rise of Adolf Hitler, the rise of the Nazi Party. Von Karman's a smart guy. He sees the lay of the land. He flees Europe, travels to the United States. And it's von Karman's research in rocketry and powered takeoff that piques the interest of the Army and brings Army Air Corps Chief Hap Arnold to Caltech in 1938, where von Karman's in residence. It was a matter of time before the U.S. was going to be drawn into Hitler's schemes in Europe. And if so, the Air Corps had to be ready with the latest in aeronautical technology. If the U.S. was going to win this eventual war, we had to be ready. We had to be a step ahead of our adversaries in science and technology, an idea that originated in that early meeting in the 1930s. Now, this partnership and the friendship, really, that developed between the general and the genius would continue throughout the war and after, and was von Karman's recommendation to Arnold that military research and development should form the foundation for the establishment of an independent United States Air Force.
I have to interject. Hap Arnold also holds a very special place for us historians because he actually created our history program in 1942 before the Air Force was even created. So Darren and I are very proud to be part of this now 80-year-old program. And Hap Arnold, in his genius, understood that we needed to learn the lessons from history and to chronicle Air Force activities. Now, we've heard a little bit about some great science and technology leaders of our past. Let's hear from some of our science and technology leaders today. And please help me welcome to the stage AFRL Commander, Major General Heather Pringle.
Hey, thank you, Darren, and thank you, Jeff. Wow, what an honor it is to be here today with folks who advance science, technology, and innovation for our nation's warfighters. What mission could be more important than that? It's truly an honor to be among you and to hear some of the stories that make it all happen. And by the way, I see a bit of a Hap Arnold and Theodore in the audience out there. So thank you for joining us here today, gentlemen. Thanks to all of you out there watching, whether you're at a watch party in the 7-Eleven or around the world at Maui, friends, family, colleagues. It's great that you took time out of your busy schedules to come here today, to come together as an AFRL family to celebrate the people that get the mission done. You know, it's been a long time since we've had an AFRL Inspire event. It was April of 2021, where we were wowed by the speakers that we had. And so I've been waiting well over a year for this to happen again, for us to come together and celebrate everything that you do, because truly, when you come together as one AFRL team, that's where all the magic happens. And Jeff and Darren did a great job of introducing the theme that we have for this year's AFRL Inspire, celebrating 75 years of Air Force history. And even though we are one AFRL supporting two services, it's good that we are acknowledging that we are standing on the shoulders of giants who stood up our Air Force and had the foresight that this service would be well grounded in science, technology, and innovation, and I know you carry forward that spirit today. And so let's take a minute, and I'd like to turn it now to our feature speaker, who is a true scientist, innovator, and technologist herself, General Ellen Pawlikowski. Of course, she was a former AFRL commander, the first female commander that this lab had, But when she left after many years of serving the Air Force and her nation, she was, you were the third four-star general that this service had ever seen as the commander of the Air Force Materiel Command, which oversees everything, not only from research and development, but through test and acquisition and logistics sustainment and the retirement of systems into the future. And so when we asked General Pawlikowski would she be willing to come and be a part of this AFRL Inspire event, there was no question that she dropped everything that she did, flew out here to Dayton to be a part of this amazing event, share some insights, and she corrected me earlier today that this story she's going to tell is special for each and every one of you because she loves this team, she knows what you do is important, and it's truly an honor, General Pawlikowski, to welcome you to the stage, one of the first lady bosses of AFRL, General Ellen Pawlikowski. Let's give her a warm round of applause.
Well, thank you, General. You know, this is my first time back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base since I retired, largely because of COVID. And so when I got the invitation from General Pringle to come and speak to AFRL, I was just delighted. As General Pringle said, I cleared my calendar and said, I will be there because truly, to me, this is like coming home. You know, I served for 36 years, and I will tell you, hands down, by far, the best organization that I was ever part of and was part of me was the Air Force Research Lab. In fact, my very first Air Force Research Lab assignment, which was 8 years into my career, was up at Rome Lab, so call out to my fellow Romans. And I can tell you that it truly was a life-changing event for me. It was during that assignment that I determined who I really was and what I wanted to do as an Air Force officer. So that's why coming back to talk at an AFRL Inspire was a great opportunity to me to share my story with all of you for the very first time. See, I was a reluctant joiner of the STEM community. You know, I went to a Catholic grammar school, and math and science was rote learning. You know, I had a pretty good memory. Those of you who work for me might say that it was a little better than pretty good, since they tell me I never forgot anything. And so I got decent grades in math because I could memorize my multiplication tables, and I practiced a lot of long division, so I could do that. And science was just memorizing facts. I didn't like science that much, though, because I didn't like those science fair projects. Because science fair projects were really art projects, weren't they? At least when I was growing up. And we didn't have computers, and so you had to draw, and you were writing things out, and I just wasn't very good at that. In fact, you know, one of the challenges I've had since I retired is color coordination when I'm going out, since I don't wear the same thing every day. So, you know, all gray works, right? So, you know, I left grammar school not at all interested in math and science. I really wanted to be a writer. That was what I wanted to do. And in the beginning in high school, things didn't get much better because my dad made me take drafting or mechanical drawing. Anybody in here ever old enough to remember taking drafting? I hated that class. Now, let me tell you why my dad wanted me to take drafting. My dad was a first-generation American. My grandmother and my grandfather came from Poland. And my grandfather died when my father was in high school. And he watched my grandmother, who was basically illiterate, and she pulled my aunt out of school to clean houses to support the family. And my dad, I had 3 sisters. My dad was determined that his 3 daughters were going to be able to take care of themselves. And so he really emphasized the importance of education. And so he wanted me to take drafting so that I would have a skill that I could use to be able to support myself. And by the way, my mother made me take typing in the 9th grade because she was a secretary and she thought that was an important skill. And by the way, she was right. That was the most valuable class I ever took in high school, was that typing class. So I still, and why did I hate drafting? Well, kind of the same reason as those art projects. You know, drafting was all about, you know, being able to put things in 3 dimensions and draw it, but my grades seemed to be dependent on whether I made the line thickness with this pencil consistent across and the lines were straight, right, Tim? And I just wasn't very good at that, right? Thank God for computers and CAD for me. But then something happened in my junior year. My math teacher turned out to be, I should also want to caveat that the thing I hated the most about math when I was in grammar school were word problems. Word problems. Why don't you just give me the problem? Why do you have to make me sort through all these words to get to the thing I have to solve, right? So I hated word problems. Now think about what I did for 36 years, right? I solved word problems. So my math teacher was the JV baseball coach. And he came in after class one day, he looked at me and he says, "You're the JV scorekeeper." And I looked at him and I said, "Hey, Coach, I know nothing about baseball and I have no interest in being a scorekeeper." He says, "Be at the field at 3 o'clock this afternoon." So I went, and for an entire season I sat next to him on the bench. And I kept score, and I kept all the statistics, and he taught me the strategy of baseball during that season. Okay, we're going to put this person, I need to figure out who's going to be my center fielder. And he would ask me questions about the statistics of individuals. He would ask me, I had all the records for all the other teams. And he would explain to me when he was shifting. And he would tell me to go find out what the score was at the varsity game and when it was we needed to start. We had the relief pitchers sitting down with us when we needed to start. And he left me with 2 lifelong gifts. One was a love for baseball strategy. And the second was he taught me to understand the value of word problems and being able to take those and translate them into things. A skill that was so, and it also opened my eyes that this stuff was not just memorization. There was things you could actually learn behind these things. So when I graduated high school, I went to engineering school, not because I was thrilled about being an engineer, but remember back to my dad, right? And how important it was that we all would be able to support ourselves. And since I had good grades in math and science, he said, "You need to go be an engineer." Well, I still wanted to be a writer. I was the editor of my high school newspaper, co-editor of the yearbook. So I went there saying, okay, I'm going. So allow me to looked at it as a job. But during the time I was there, I had to take drafting over again, by the way, because everybody had to take drafting. But this time I got an A. During that time, I began to see more and more how much I enjoyed this word problem thing, and applying it, especially in labs where you really did lab work. And since I loved to write, it was kind of neat to write about what you were discovering. So by the way, I never had a problem finding lab partners. I always had them lined up at my door saying, "Hey, will you be my lab partner?" Because they knew that I'd write the reports, which everybody hate, as you know, engineers hate to do. And then when I was ready to graduate, here's this kid who didn't even want to go to engineering school, and I went off to Berkeley to get my PhD in thermodynamics, and it was because in my junior year, I had a thermo teacher that realized how much, thermo was so simple, right? What goes in must come out. Everything balances. And my professor said, if you want to do this kind of work after you leave the Air Force, because I had joined ROTC, which was another reinforcement for me to be an engineer, because in 1974, when I joined ROTC, there were not very many jobs open to women. We couldn't be pilots, we couldn't be navigators, we couldn't be missileers, and the Air Force was downsizing at the end of the Vietnam War, and about the only way to get into the Air Force if you weren't an operator was to be an engineer. So that more enforced me, and I had joined ROTC out of curiosity, but I loved the culture, and I loved being part of something bigger than myself. So that reinforced me being an engineer. So I went off, I finished graduate school, found the love of my life while I was in ROTC, my husband, and so for the first 8 years plus, frankly, of my military career, I really wasn't thinking about science and technology. My focus was, how did my husband and I find assignments so that we could stay together? And we were raising a family. I had 2 young children. And so at about the 8-year point, I got my first AFRL assignment, which at that time was technically Rome Air Development Center, which some affectionately called Relax and Drink Coffee. And about 3 months after I got there, it became Rome Lab, and I was there because there's a B-52 at Griffiths Air Force Base, and my husband was a B-52 radar navigator, so I was only there because it was his assignment that drove me there. And when I when I was there, though, it really was where I found out what I actually loved. Is there a problem? Okay. So I got up there, and there was all sorts of cool things going on up there. Real technology, you know, we were talking about history. And as I was preparing this talk, I realized how much history I was seeing real time. I walked into one laboratory, and there was this real rudimentary setup of optics that was exploring essentially automatic target recognition. And by the way, we had the internet. We didn't have World Wide Web. That didn't exist yet. We were doing file transfer protocols and things like that, but we had the internet. And it wasn't something you found anywhere. And then we had work being done on voice recognition. And there was this thing the size of a sugar cube that they were telling me had as much memory as the 3 stacks of computer files that were in the other room. And now think about that, we got like 10 times what was in that sugar cube in your cell phone today. And then there were these guys at Hanscom that were attached to Rome that were doing something all excited about cold atoms. Now remember, this was 1991. And these were the cool things that they were doing. And I remember the guys up at Hanscom were saying, yeah, and you know, we think we can do a navigation system with this. Right? It's a building almost, right? With all these refrigerators and all of these optics benches. I was like, what in the world? But there was the other end of the spectrum at Rome as well. We were directly supporting the intelligence community for their data handling system. And then what happened in 1990? Anybody remember? Desert Storm. And all of a sudden, the laboratory's focus shifted from thinking about 10 years from now to how do I deliver capability tomorrow to the B-52 radar and all these other things. And that's when I saw what really became my passion, which was delivering technology, making technology work and allowing it to be a part of this great Air Force. And that's where I formed the phrase, General Pringle, that I hear you use all the time, is that technology doesn't know its application until we tell it. And what I also realized is that it takes a team and a team of individuals in order to be successful, a team of scientists that have different skills, the first of which is you need those visionaries. You need those people like those scientists at Hanscom that could see this room full of, you know, refrigerators and optics and say, there's a navigation system in there somewhere, right? And you need, so I call those the visionaries. The only problem with visionaries is that they're not real good at predicting how long and what it's really going to take to get from where we are today to that vision. And so I remember a quote from one of my heroes of my generation when it comes to technologies, and that was Admiral Rickover. And Admiral Rickover said, "Great ideas and innovation must be driven into existence with courage and patience." So the second group of people that I believe are important that I saw up there at Rome are what I call the technology drivers. They're the ones that can take that vision and have the courage, because trust me, it takes a lot of courage and a lot of patience to be able to drive it into its existence. So I call them the drivers. But then there's a third group of people that are so critical, and they are those that I call the bridgers. Those are the people that can talk to the technologists and understand what the technologist is saying, and at the same time talk to the operator, the warfighter, and understand what the warfighter needs, and to provide that bridge between them. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am not a visionary. I would sit there and scratch my head and think, how did they even think of that? You know, why would they even be thinking about that? I am a technology driver, and it's where my passion is, and it's what I love to do, and it's what I dedicated the rest of my Air Force career doing in almost every assignment I had, even when you didn't think it was something that was so driven by technology, because technology is the core of our Air Force. And the third bridger, I wasn't a bad bridger. It wasn't my strong point, but because I was a military officer and I'd gone to all the training, you know, I understood the ops side a little bit, and then as the more senior I got and found myself not only the only woman in the room, but also knowledge. And I was able to use those opportunities of being with Air Force senior leadership as a 3-star and as a 4-star to be that bridger, to try to bring that too. So for me, it was during that time that I realized where my real passion was and what I wanted to focus on for the rest of my career. At the same time, my husband discovered that, shared with me that what he really wanted to do was be a high school math teacher. And so we made a decision that he would separate from the Air Force and pursue his, being a high school math teacher, and I would stay in. And so that assignment was a major turning point for me. It was up to that point, I had not even decided whether I was going to stay in the Air Force or not. At that point, whether I stayed in the Air Force or not was whether I could continue to have assignments where my husband and I were together. Well, it was 17 years before I returned to AFRL. But in those 17 years, AFRL was never far from where I was, because I still kept that passion of trying to bring technology to bear to help our warfighters come home safe. And during those 17 years, there was one assignment that stands out in particular for the importance of being that technology driver and, frankly, my relationship with AFRL, and that was as the Airborne Laser Program Director. In fact, I had people that would tell me that I had the Air Force science fiction project, right? And it's interesting to listen you talk about the history, because that program was the hardest job I had in the Air Force by far. I had visionaries. Most of what we did, and a lot of the people in the program office, although we were not officially part of AFRL, or actually came from AFRL, or essentially detailed from AFRL. So I had the visionaries. And as my good friend Doug Lavero, some of you may know, is also an AFRL alum, when I first got that job, he called me up and he says, "Ellen, you need to remember that laser physicists lie." And I had to go back and correct him. I said, "No, Doug, they don't lie. They're just visionaries." And they could see what they thought these lasers could do, right? Huge potential. But there was a little bit of detail about how to actually get there that they really didn't quite understand. So perfect role for me as a technology driver, right? And then I had the challenge with the bridgers too, because most of the operators in the Air Force at that time had grown up watching Star Wars and Star Trek. And so our operators had a very unrealistic view of what a laser system looked like. No, you can't hold it in your hand and evaporate somebody, right? You know, you got 3 crates full of stuff to get out a small amount. Every day we were on the verge of a technical catastrophe that could end the program. This is where the courage came in. Because we had this big piece of glass for the window, and if somebody dropped that or dropped something on it or cracked it, 5 years to replace it. And then in the Pentagon, there was a group of people, very influential people, that were driving to cancel the program. So it took tremendous courage. In fact, twice during that job, I was on the verge of resigning because I didn't think I could continue to do it. And at the same time, as a leader, my focus was to fend off all of these threats from the team so the team could keep focusing on moving one step forward. And if there's any ABL alum out here, and Mike Gregg, by the way, was an alum of sorts because he was at the Missile Defense Agency. So Mike, a call out to you if you're out there. At any given time, that program could be canceled because of something else. And so I remember at one point I went to Lieutenant General Ron Kadish and I said, I just don't think I can do this anymore. And he says, suck it up, you're not going anywhere. And I turned many, many times to my AFRL friends during that time period. And it truly was a part of this ecosystem that AFRL is the heart and soul of the technology for our Air Force. In fact, when you look at the crucible and what was produced in terms of technical leaders out of the Airborne Laser Program Office, I think you'll be surprised. Susan Thornton, Director of Directed Energy, retired as on the air staff, was the Director of Engineering. Tom Fisher was her deputy. He recently retired, I think, as the LCMC engineer or AFMC engineer. Heidi Bullock, contracting officer, because it's a team sport. And contracting officers are just as important to what we do as engineers and scientists. Robert McMurray, a fellow Air Force Research Lab. He's the guy, by the way, that had I talk about patience. You know, when I joined that program in 2000, we were supposed to shoot down a missile in 2004. Well, Robert McMurray finally accomplished that in 2010. So there was a giant P in patience if you were the Airborne Laser program director. Kelly Hammett. Kelly was a major, and now he's the director of the Rapid Space, right. So when you look at that program, even though those 17 years I was not actually part of AFRL, AFRL was there with me in that most challenging time. So I did come back in 2010 as the AFRL commander, and if many of you know, this was a very difficult time for me personally. In a 3-month time span, I lost my husband to a heart attack and my sister to lung cancer. And in both cases, it was the support and my AFRL family that helped me to get through that time period and to continue to pursue my Air Force career. At the same time, it was during another one of the General Pringle and I were talking about this cyclical time of AFRL. The Air Force leadership was like, hey, you guys just aren't relevant. What have you done for me lately? And the MAGCOMs were not happy about what they were getting. And so when I came here, I had to rally the troops. Frankly, it was a little bit of an imbalance at the time. Too many visionaries, not enough bridgers. So we put together what at that time was called our flagship programs, not dissimilar than the Vanguard programs. You remember, Daryl? And we empowered a bunch of great bridgers by the name of Beach Wilcox. So you remember Beach, Dave Hardy, work in space, and of course, the greatest bridger that I have ever met in my whole life, Alok Das. I don't know if Alok is still with you, but he was the best bridger we ever had. And as the result of that, we really turned things around. And AFRL got back to its status as being, you know, essentially the brain trust of the technology. And when I came back as AFMC commander, many of those processes were still in place. I understand from General Pringler, we've done another refresh, not unlike the things we were trying to do. And so it's, like I said, it's a cycle. So it was the AFRL team that once again helped me during a difficult time in my life personally and a difficult challenge I had as the AFRL commander. And finally, my last assignment is the Air Force Materiel Command commander. Remember I said even though in theory it looks like I'm not responsible for driving technology, I was handed a task by then General Welch to do something about strategic development planning and experimentation. And this was supposed to be a MAGCOM level thing. Well, you know who I turned to. I came to AFRL and I said, I need you to stand up this office. We need visionaries, because development planning, you're looking way into the future. We need technology drivers, because it's got to make sense and we got to know how we're going to get there. And we also need bridgers. So I pulled out Jack Blackhurst, who I think has retired, and Chris Ristic, who I think is still here. And I think it's a testament to AFRL that that office is still there, has expanded its function, and has survived 3 chiefs of staff and 3 or 4 different secretaries during the time it's been in existence, and delivering on those on that technology, providing technology. In my last assignment, to meet the challenges that I faced. So now I'm here today. Now I'm an old technologist. Miss every day the opportunity to be in there, you know, in the trenches. I used to come over here when I was the AFMC commander to get, because I would quote unquote suffer from hardware withdrawals, like I said, when I'm tired of listening to view graphs and briefings and I needed to go see some real things happening. But one of the things that's nice about, you know, spending 36 years in the Air Force is that patience starts to pay off. And you start to see so many of the things that you worked on that were just visionary ideas become reality. And when I heard that this was a 75-year anniversary, I was in the Air Force for 36 of those 75 years. I lived the second half of that history. And that is so cool. And when you start to think about it and you look at the major events in that history and you realize the impact of the work of AFRL, every single one of those. I came in during the Cold War. We won the Cold War, not because we massed major troops in Europe. We won it with our technology, remember? The Soviet Union just could not keep up with us. Won for us. The next really major event in my career was Desert Storm. Where did stealth come from? Where did GPS come from? Where did the command and control systems that we were using during Desert Storm come from? Don't mention the tremendous things that AFRL raced to the field during Desert Storm. All of the technology that came to bear during Desert Storm was ours. It was our visionaries and our technology drivers and our bridges that brought it there. And then, you know, I look now at the latest big thing about, you know, commercial guys, they're doing more than us. Look at that technology. Almost all that technology had its roots here. Artificial intelligence. I mean, they just did a little better job, the commercial guys, in the bridging piece, which seems to be the one we always have to come back to, Heather, right? In the bridging piece. But it's all there. And it's all what's making a difference for us today. And it's what you do today is going to be what's going to make a difference in the future. So I want to finish the way I finished every commander's call that I had, with one last thank you to you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today, but most importantly, thank you for what you do every day. because there are soldiers, sailors, airmen, Coast Guardsmen, Marines, and Guardians that come home safe because of what you do. So thank you for the opportunity, General Pringle, to share my story, and hopefully some of you will have the opportunity to live your dream like I did. Because at Rome Lab, it's where dreams become reality. As long as you got visionaries, drivers, and bridgers. Thanks, everybody.
Darren, we have to follow that.
Yeah, I think so. General Pawlikowski, you're obviously a legend to the lab, the command, and the service. And it's really an honor having you here today. And you're a particular legend to directed energy, as you mentioned. Speed of light to the fight, always, right? And General Pringle, it's an honor having you here today as well. Both your historic experiences are just absolutely incredible. Thank you. So why does any of this matter, right? Why do we study history? Why is the position of historian one of the oldest in the entire service itself, as Jeff mentioned? Well, we study history because we need to analyze how the Air Force has accelerated, innovated, and thrived through the years, and to assess where to take that technology into the future. We study the past because what we learn from experience helps us in the future. History helps us identify tools for current decision makers today to make better decisions tomorrow. Now, we can't predict the future, obviously, but by looking at the road we've traveled on, that can help us figure out what to do on the road ahead.
Yeah, absolutely, Darren. You know, we can solve today's problems better by arming ourselves with the lessons from the past. And with this being the 75th anniversary of the establishment of the U.S. Air Force, I can't think of a better time to celebrate our absolutely amazing history. Now, today, you will hear some present-day stories from people across the lab who are making history right now. And before each speaker, Darren and I will share some stories from the past, and then we'll also explore how history can help us advance technology into the future.
That's right. We'll welcome on stage a planetary scientist, a biologist, a nurse scientist, an aerospace engineer, a computer scientist, a chemist, and a psychologist, just to name a few. And today's speakers are part of this continuum of research and development that stretches deep into the past and has ramifications far into the future.
Really, today is just only one point in time on this very long and constantly evolving continuum.
Correct.
So our first speaker today, Major Michael Nyack, is going to share with us his incredible story about around the world in 80 steps. Now, scientists have long traveled across the globe to conduct research. And as an Air Force historian, it makes me think of the first person to fly over the South Pole, Bernd Balken. Now, it was during World War II that we became a global Air Force, and Balken actually played a part in that. Hap Arnold asked Balken personally to join the Army Air Forces, and Bert Balken led the building of an air base at the Arctic Circle and the extreme conditions there, and then later helped build another base far north of the Arctic Circle during the Cold War. Now, here's a fun fact. In 1929, nearly 100 years ago, Bernd Balken flew over the exact same spot that Major Nyack lived at in 2018 for several months. Now, Major Nyack was on the ground. He was conducting telescope observations in support of space situational awareness. Darren, I found out that Major Nyack is a pretty talented guy. So, he's a planetary scientist, he's an astrophysicist, he's a test pilot, he's a program manager, he's even a skydiving instructor.
I know he's a pretty cool dude, in my opinion. And just to set the stage a little bit more for the kind of guy Major Nyack is, he's stationed in Maui. He volunteers to journey to the South Pole. If that's not dedication to the mission, I don't know what is. But without further ado, let's welcome Major Michael Nyack on stage for him to share a little bit about life in isolation from his Antarctic research experience.
Flying to the South Pole, crossing the Transantarctic Mountains yields hundreds of miles of flat plateau and icy emptiness. Beneath the wings of a C-130 with skis, thick rivers of endlessly blowing snow make the landscape feel like an alien world. Then, a speck in the distance. So small, it could very well be dirt on the window. And then it resolves into dirt on the window. It's a long flight. But ultimately, a dot on the horizon resolves into this building on stilts, surrounded by nothing to distinguish it. A human presence so far south, so far away from civilization that the cares of the world might as well be a planet away. Located at 90 degrees south, this is Amundsen Scott South Pole Research Station, or if you want to sound like a local, just Pole. I spent a summer here as a U.S. Antarctic Program Principal Investigator. And back in that time frame, late 2018, early 2019, maybe 1 out of 10 people would have experienced this level of isolation in their personal lives. But today it's 10 out of 10. Thanks to COVID-19, every one of you knows what it's like to be separated from the world. Most of you weren't isolated alone. You were in your home with a few people and the rest of the world was behind a screen. You and your family were a bubble, a unit, a crew. The same has been true for deployed crews to the South Pole of our planet for decades now. In the brutal cold at 90 South, I learned 2 important lessons about how to be happy in the modern world. But thanks to the pandemic, all of you have a little glimpse into what it might be like to live at the South Pole. Now, I'm a planetary scientist by trade. I don't say astrophysicist anymore because there's this condition where I say astrophysicist and some people hear astrologer. I use techniques from a field of study called astroseismology, which again sounds like a mouthful of peanut butter, and I just tried to say astrology again. But that's what took me down to the bottom of the world. Astroseismology, not peanut butter. And if there's one thing to know about me, it's this. I love the warmth. I grew up in Southern California, right by the beach. I went to college in Daytona Beach and Santa Cruz. And when I got the call telling me I was going to the South Pole, as you've heard, I was sitting at my AFRL desk in Maui, Hawaii. So yeah, I went from Maui to McMurdo Station on the coast of Antarctica, the California of Antarctica, if you will. McMurdo's a beach town. You know, in the way that Manhattan's an affordable place to live. You have to look really hard and be a little delusional to believe it. From here, it was on to the very bottom of the world. This is the ceremonial South Pole, a place so far south that if I did this, I would have just walked through every longitude on Earth, around the world in just a few steps. I took this picture right after I landed at the South Pole. It's the bravest picture I've ever taken, and I took a sigh just remembering it, because it feels like -77 Fahrenheit in this picture. And I still took my ski mask off, apparently to prove that I can both smile and do something stupid at the same time. I looked up the temperature in Maui the day I landed at the South Pole, because apparently I hate myself, and it was +80 Fahrenheit. It's hard to envision what 157 degrees colder really is, so here's a visual aid. Those chunks of ice on my eyelashes, by the way, that's after 10 minutes of thawing indoors. Enough to wilt any California soul. But here's the first thing I learned from life at the South Pole. Happiness is the little things. All around us, every day, we're surrounded by small moments that have the potential to make us happy. Like a smile or a beat on the radio or a good hair day or a really funny bad hair day. But the problem is we've moved the goalposts for happiness so far past these things because we're used to them. Living at the pole showed me I needed to move those way back and relish the little things. Like freshies in the cafeteria. Freshies are fresh fruits and vegetables. They're flown in from New Zealand on a ski plane, if there's room, which there frequently isn't. And you can't grow your own freshies because the Antarctic Treaty forbids growing any living organism that isn't native to the continent, which includes yeast, by the way, making Antarctica the only place where homebrewing beer is an international treaty violation. At Pole, an ordinary orange had the power to make me happy, because it was the first time in days I hadn't eaten frozen, canned something. Happiness is the little things. A heater made my California soul real happy. A glass of absolutely awful box wine. I mean, the stuff that's basically flavored Windex made me happy, because someone chose to share it with me. Turns out that's really key when the nearest bar is 2,000 miles away, so make friends. Here's another example, water. Water is a precious resource at the South Pole, because it takes fuel to turn ice into water, and there's only so much fuel to go around for a season. So everyone at Pole is restricted to 2-minute showers just twice a week. Before Pole, shower was a chore. At Pole, yeah, hot shower made me happy, which is a good thing, because it certainly didn't make me clean. Fast forward to coming back to the US, and it's the pandemic. And just like everyone, I'm getting dragged down by it all, not motivated to do much. But from my time and experience at Pole, I knew that I had to make a conscious effort to look around for the things I took for granted. And when I found them, spend that 1 or 2 minutes to remind myself that I could be happy and that those little things could make me happy. So often, when we experience fleeting happiness, we do all we can to make it less fleeting. But in doing so, we just make ourselves less happy. That small moment to put the world aside and enjoy a glass of wine, a hot shower, or even just an all-American YouTube video of Dane Cook getting drop-kicked in the face by a kangaroo, take that moment. There's actually no video of Dane Cook getting drop-kicked by a kangaroo, but it made me happy, made someone in the audience happy for a moment as well. And that's the point. We need those little victories. My time at Pole was a blip compared to some of the folks that I deployed with. One gentleman I met had spent 20 winters down there. 20. What motivates him to keep coming back? It's not the money, it's not the views, it's just ice and blowing snow in every direction. After 20 years, it's not the uniqueness of the location anymore, so what is it? The average work week at Pole is 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. These are engineers, nurses, scientists, mechanics, people who could be successful doing what they do anywhere else for less pay, for more pay, and less misery. So what keeps them coming back to Antarctica? The answer to that question is the second thing that I learned from the South Pole. Shared suffering breeds teamwork. I came alone, a team of one, and I knew no one at Pole when I arrived. No internet, no tech experts to help me how to figure out to fix things that didn't work. I got frostnip in 4 fingers, which turns out is like the junior varsity version of frostbite. Every day, I had to drag this sled with my generator and gasoline and equipment out from the station to this lonely piece of ice where I had my telescope. Some days, that sled weighed 200 pounds. Every day, I had to mush, literally jerk from the left to the right to break my sled out of the ice. Doing so when it's 50 below, for a quarter-mile journey, half-mile round trip, well, that was enough to make me miserable, at least. And yet, despite that, why was the day I left the South Pole one of the saddest days of my life? Because by the time I left, I was no longer an expedition of one. Instead of the bleak misery and suffering I expected in Antarctica, I found happiness in the little things. I found teamwork, this strange camaraderie in shared suffering. So let me take you back to South Pole Station and the galley kitchen there. After the meal rush, I noticed some of the more experienced polies would slip into the kitchen and start working in the dish pit. These scientists, nurses, snowcat drivers would clean as many as 100 plates after every meal. But why? There's a kitchen staff whose job it is to clean the plates. I asked this question and got a shockingly simple answer. If I do the dishes when I have spare time, I'm putting time back in someone's day. Someone will put time back in my day. The environment at the South Pole calls you to become the kind of person who can put your misery aside. Not forget it, just put it aside. Walk up to a struggling crewmate and say, I'm here, you're here, this sucks. Let's do this. Let's do this together. When you're on an expedition and the going is tough, people are pushing hard and kind of miserable, you can make life easier on the people around you by pitching in when you don't have to. And anyone who weathered the pandemic with a significant other knows this. When you take something off your teammate's plate, it makes a difference. This mentality is somehow instilled without any formal training into the polies that keep coming back to Antarctica year after year. And after 2 weeks, I bought in. I was in there in the dish pit doing dishes as well. I actually met most of the station in the dish pit. People I might not have crossed paths with or gotten to know otherwise, like the gentleman who maintained miles of heating pipes buried in these really cool ice tunnels deep underneath the station. Or the logistics woman who managed the snow vehicles. And one day, maybe about a week or so after I started showing up in the dish pit, I'm out in the cold, strapping into my harness and sled, and that logistics woman drives up with a snowmobile. It was like the heavens parting. And she said, "Let me drag that for you." By the time I left Pole, I was no longer an expedition of one. Shared suffering breeds teamwork. It forges that human connection in the midst of isolation. And I brought that lesson back with me from Antarctica to life at the lab, life during the pandemic, life after. Shared suffering can be a call to be a certain kind of expeditionary person and an opportunity to find similar people. People with whom you can say, "I'm here, you're here. This sucks. Let's do this together, and I'll see you on the other side of this." There's a saying at Pole. There's only two types of people who come back from Antarctica. People who went once and never again. Whatever they found down there, whatever they learned about themselves in the isolation and the cold, they didn't like, and they'll never be back. People of the second kind faced the elements, struggled, conquered, and got hooked on that feeling of conquering. The isolation made them stronger. And as I look back on my time in Antarctica, I do feel like it made me stronger, more calm in the face of chaos, better able to handle the stresses of lockdown. So as we all look back on that time in lockdown and the pandemic, let's ask ourselves, just as I did when I flew away from Antarctica, what did I learn from my time in isolation? Moving forward, can we be more like the polies who keep going back, better able to withstand the stresses of life by finding happiness in the little things and building bridges with people around us every day? I'd like to think that we can use the South Pole as a framework with which to make ourselves stronger, more connected, and more present. I'm still a California guy who hates the cold at heart, but for that, sign me up to go back any day. Thank you.
It's incredible, Major Naik. You know, similarly, I volunteered to go to Maui, and they sent me to the middle of New Mexico. So here you go. So Major Naik was in a very cold, very hostile environment, hostile to human life. And throughout our history, the Air Force has sent our people to similar locations that have tested the limits of the human body. And to enable these excursions, the Air Force has developed technology that help humans survive and thrive in these locations. Now, in effect, technology has created superhuman abilities, allowing people to do things like high-altitude flight, space travel, things the unaided human body simply cannot do. Other examples of Air Force technology that allow people to survive in extreme locations include oxygen systems, pressure suits, warm clothing itself.
Yeah, Darren, you know, these technologies allow us to be in places that we were never meant to be. Going 3 times the speed of sound, that's 2,000 miles an hour. Being up at 80,000 feet, that's 13 miles up in the air. And Darren, it's a little early for lunch, isn't it?
History makes me hungry.
Well, okay, if we're having lunch, what's on the menu?
Well, there's a picture of an astronaut that says cinnamon apple wedges.
Astronaut food.
Oh.
How cool. Well, you know, it makes me think that the lab develops technology that helps not only outside the human body, but inside the human body too. And a great example of someone who did just that in our past is Beatrice Finkelstein. She was the pioneering food researcher who created the food for the early astronauts. And she created that toothpaste tube food right here in her lab at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and her lab became humorously known as Bee's Diner. And we have a modern-day person who has a tie to Beatrice Finkelstein, and that's Dr. Mike Goodson, who is our next speaker. Now, Dr. Goodson is a research biologist, and he studies microbes, which are microorganisms inside the human body. And his goal is to ensure that our warfighters perform optimally even when they're deployed to extreme locations. Now, Dr. Goodson travels with warfighters to collect samples, and he actually even spent time with submariners to understand the effect on the human body of living in these constricted conditions. And I think both Dr. Goodson and Beatrice Finkelstein are an example of how the lab creates technology that helps us to not only survive, but also thrive regardless of the environment. And please help me welcome Dr. Mike Goodson, and we'll learn more about how microbes can increase human performance.
Sorry, I was just chatting to my microbes. Darren, I saw you were chatting to yours too, so that's cool. Right, if you woke up this morning feeling less than human, you would be right, because we're all mostly microbe. There are more microbial cells in and on your body than there are human cells. There are 2 pounds of microbes in your gut alone. Now, we all have our own personalized mix of microbes that we've acquired throughout our lifetime, and whose diversity was built up from birth by interactions with family members and food and pets. Actually, my kids want me to get a dog, so they always tell me I should get a dog because of my microbes. These microbes, they're absolutely essential, though, for our survival. They do things that we cannot. Basically, they digest parts of our diet. They make essential vitamins. They even stop invading pathogens. Now, every day, our human self and our microbial self use molecules as words to have a conversation with each other. So humans evolved in this microbial world, so it shouldn't be surprising that we can speak the same language. Now, sometimes these conversations are slow, such as when the words are molecules in our bloodstream. But they can be fast, such as when the words initiate firing of nerves between our gut and our brain. In fact, our gut is the second most innervated organ in our body after our brain. Some people even call it our second brain. So not a bad place for our 2 pounds of microbes to send and receive signals from. Your gut feelings may just be messages from your gut microbes. So if these conversations turn into expletive-laden yelling matches, the result isn't just a dodgy tummy when you're on holiday, but it can also affect our mood, our cognition, our tolerance to pain, even our ability to focus. Now, the best way to keep a healthy conversation going with your microbes is to do the things your mum always told you to do. Eat more vegetables, get more sleep, and do more exercise. Yeah, who knew mums are always right? The problem for our deployed warfighters is that often they don't have the luxury of doing all or even any of those things. So consequently, their internal dialogue with their microbes can be a little bit off. This results in health issues, but also lowered mood, reduced cognition, reduced pain tolerance, reduced ability to focus, all the things they need to rely on to help complete their mission. So success or failure in the future fight depends not only on who has the best strategies and tactics, but also who has the best microbes. And in our lab, we're looking to identify those best microbes. Diarrhea. Now, diarrhea is the most prevalent health issue affecting our deployed warfighters. Now, unfortunately, that's as true today as it was in medieval times. Records from the 11th century report that diarrhea, typhus, and fever are the 3 great afflictions of armies. Now, over half of our deployed warfighters will be afflicted by diarrhea during their deployment. And the majority of those experience multiple episodes. And chronic GI issues can even persist when they come back to the US. Now, in about 60% of cases, the the deployment diarrhea can be attributed to food poisoning bugs. But the rest of cases, there was no known cause. And not everyone in a unit succumbed to it. So could their microbiome be a driving factor? Well, to find out, we looked at the gut microbiomes of deployed warfighters throughout their deployment. And it's really hard to look inside someone and see what their microbes are, so we had to take a different route. Now, fortunately, the body has a built-in gut microbe delivery system. Poo. So we collected weekly poo samples from deployed warfighters throughout their six-month deployment, which is a lot of poo. Now, unfortunately for them, but fortunate for us, some of these warfighters experienced diarrhea during their deployment. So we could compare those that were and were not affected. And we kept seeing that certain microbes were more prevalent in those warfighters that experienced travelers' diarrhea, that were susceptible to diarrhea. And different microbes were more prevalent in the guts of those that were resilient. And this was true regardless of deployment location. So suggesting that there are resilient and susceptible microbiomes. Now, the hardest thing about doing microbiome research is that humans are terrible research subjects. Right? They never stick to the same diet, they don't like to be in the same place all the time, and they all have different activity levels. It's a nightmare. So consequently, we looked for a deployed environment where those issues weren't, well, those factors weren't such an issue. And the answer? Submarines. Submarines are a really well-defined environment. A submariner doesn't experience wildly different diets or stresses or environments than their crewmates. And since we're one lab supporting two services, there is no better proxy for manned spaceflight on Earth than a submarine. Limited diet, altered circadian rhythm, stress, poor sleep, lack of ability to exercise, lack of vitamin D. We know all of those things affect our microbes. Now, diarrhea isn't such a problem on a submarine, fortunately, but over a third of the silent service's unplanned losses to the force are because of psychological issues. Some people are just better at coping with being a submariner. So could their microbiomes be a driving factor? Well, to find out, we collected more poo before, during, and after submarine deployments and linked it to mood and cognition data. We saw that certain microbes were more prevalent in those that were experiencing vigor, and different microbes were more prevalent in the gut microbiomes of those experiencing fatigue. Again, suggesting that there are resilient and susceptible microbiomes. So you may be thinking, how is this helping our warfighter? Well, unlike the information contained in our own cells, it is way easier to change who is in the microbiome and what those microbes do. So armed with the knowledge gained by people pooing for science, we can design interventions to promote these resilient microbiomes. Now, the easiest, or one of the ways to change or to promote those resilient microbiomes is to change one's diet. Nutrition is the driving factor to what thrives and survives in our gut. Now, it can be hard to change someone's diet while they're on deployment, but what we found is that the microbes are present before someone deploys, persist, and exert their effect during their deployment. So by changing someone's diet before you deploy, you can affect their health and performance while they're on deployment. And we're working with the Army to measure the success of some of these dietary interventions. Another way to promote a resilient microbiome is to add microbes to that conversation. Basically, seed your microbiome with the microbes that are the equivalent of the people you want at your next dinner party. These microbes are known as probiotics, and you may have heard or seen them in your supermarket. They're even present in that yogurt there. The key is to determine which microbes provide the benefits you want to promote warfighter resiliency. And we think we have some candidates that will. Now, a way to ensure that the probiotic has the effect that you want is to engineer it to be that reassuring friend that we all need in times of crisis. So we can engineer microbes to keep us on task even when we're tired. And that white powder in that vial is an example of doing just that. And we're planning experiments to test the effectiveness of this engineered microbe in humans. So the conversations we have with our microbial self are a really important part of what makes a resilient and high-performing warfighter. And we're well on the way to understanding how those conversations work and how to make them better. But until then, I'm going to continue to chat to my microbes by finishing my lunch. Cheers.
I should have had some of your space food. Now I'm hungry.
Yeah, it's not sitting well.
So we've heard about limits to the human body. And one way that we can overcome these limits is to pair humans with machines. And there are many examples of human-machine teaming in history, and perhaps the best one is the Wright brothers, who paired their flying machine with humans, and that allowed us to fly. Now, a further step is to add automation or autonomy to these machines. And there's a long history of autonomy. It goes back to 1912 and the invention of the autopilot. Now, I'm sure, Darren, you can probably think of some other autonomy examples since then.
Sure. I mean, naturally, I think of von Karman once again, General Arnold's right-hand man for science and technology throughout the war and after. But towards the end of the war, von Karman starts bringing up this idea of balance. And that balance is needed between these machines that are rapidly developing, that we're developing here in the United States, and humans. And there's a couple quotes I'd like to highlight here today, and they're both from the 1945 Toward New Horizons, and this is from the first volume, Science, the Key to Air Supremacy. But he needed these quotes, as we'll see, to show how we can become master strategists of the air. And so you see, a proper balance is needed between weapons directed by humans and purely automatic weapons is needed. And again, so the aim for this future force is to build up a war machine that consists of technical devices, but that are always directed by the minds of human beings. And this is how we can become master strategists of the air. But why is this important to us today? Well, that's exactly what AFRL does every day of the week.
Yeah, and Darren, the Air Force acted upon von Karman's vision not too long after he wrote those very words. In the 1950s, in partnership with MIT's Lincoln Laboratory, the Air Force developed the automated SAGE air defense system, which protected our country against nuclear-armed bombers. And this revolutionary system had digital computers that were linked by telephone lines. It could track aircraft in real time. It could even control interceptors that were airborne via a data link. And one of the remarkable people that worked on SAGE was at MIT's Lincoln Laboratory, Inez Hazel, who was a pioneering computer programmer and systems analyst. She worked on the first digital computer, and then she later worked on the SAGE system. And her remarkable career spanned more than 4 decades. Longer than the SAGE system, actually. SAGE system lasted about 30 years, and then in the 1980s, as it was being taken down, the Air Force began developing another autonomous system called Taos.
Yeah, Taos. It's also a beautiful town in New Mexico, north of Kirtland Air Force Base, where our space scientists, engineers, and historians telework from. I mean, go on their off hours, of course. They go on their off hours. And this was true in 1989 as well, when our folks were developing a new space system. And they loved Taos so much that they backronymed the name of the town to become the Technology for Autonomous Operational Survivability, Taos. And it really becomes the model for how we do space today. And it's launched in 1994 to terrify some of us. That's about 30 years ago. Sit with that for a while. And it has a mission to demonstrate autonomous space navigation. And what it does is it reduces the need for ground stations. It increases our space situational awareness, and it increases our autonomous space operations. And so it's an extraordinary program. And it shows us that autonomy is nothing new. You know, we've been working on these systems for the past 30 years, 30 plus years and beyond. And that's absolutely, absolutely incredible. Now, our next speaker will tell us how the next generation of autonomous systems is working for us today. Dr. Carrie-Ann Hobbs is a research aerospace engineer, part of our Autonomy Capabilities team, or ACT-3. She's going to tell us a little bit about the next generation of autonomous systems and working on enhancing safety in the modern space environment.
I love to paint, and this one is one of my favorites. When you look at it, what do you see? A mother and daughter, sisters, strangers? The woman in the painting is me as an adult, holding on to my childhood sense of wonder as I wander in the dark, navigating life and research. As a child, I was inspired to look up at the stars by fictional heroes like Star Trek's Captain Catherine Janeway, and real-life heroes like NASA's first female shuttle commander, Eileen Collins. As an adult, when I look up at the sky, I imagine the thousands of man-made objects in orbit. I'm using the natural and the artificial stars as inspiration and guidance in my research as I wander in the dark, only able to see as far as the lantern will illuminate. I'm drawing on this inspiration in my research as I teach AI to safely and autonomously navigate spacecraft. Launch costs have decreased dramatically. Space business is booming, and space is getting crowded. Every dot in this figure is an object larger than a cell phone. As the number of objects in space is increasing exponentially, so are the ideas for how to deal with it. Soon we'll see spacecraft being built in space rather than sent up complete. We'll see orbiting gas stations and mechanic shops that are going up to refuel and repair satellites. We'll also see trash and tow truck satellites that are going up to remove dead satellites and debris. To enable all of this, we have a huge space traffic management problem that the international community needs to work together to solve. But space isn't just about Earth orbit. We're also going out to the moon and Mars, where there are large delays in communication. Communicating back and forth between the moon and Earth only takes about 2.5 seconds. But it can take anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes for a signal to go one way between the Earth and Mars. By the time we know that something bad happened on a Mars mission, it might be too late to send up instructions to fix it. So between this complex space traffic management problem and the communicating at vast distances problem, we are soon approaching a point where it's going to be impossible for a manned pilot or a Space Force guardian in a mission control room to control spacecraft 100% of the time. Could the autonomous capability of AI help? Well, AI is brittle. We see this every day when we interact with devices. Your home assistant doesn't understand what you said, your vacuuming robot gets itself stuck in the bathroom again, and your learning thermostat freezes you out while it learns how to balance saving energy and meeting your temperature preferences. When these things happen, it's not a big deal. Annoying, but not life-threatening. You can repeat what you were going to say to your home assistant. You can rescue your vacuuming robot and know that it will probably get to your living room tomorrow. And you can override your thermostat with manual settings to stay warm. It's an entirely different matter when we talk about letting AI control a spacecraft in orbit. Spacecraft are responsible for critical functions for our everyday lives, from the GPS on your phone giving you directions, to getting data to meteorologists to make weather predictions, to even authorizing a credit card transaction. A mistake by an AI on a spacecraft could result in the loss of billions of dollars of economic value, priceless space-based data and resources, and for the military, the lives of soldiers on the ground who depend on satellites for communication and imagery. In a worst-case scenario, one spacecraft could collide with another spacecraft, creating debris that then goes and collides with other spacecraft, cascading with more collisions with other spacecraft, resulting in a condition known as Kessler syndrome. If we're going to put AI in space, we have to ensure that that AI is safe. My team at the Air Force Research Lab is building AI in the form of artificial neural networks, which mimic the way that neurons in the human brain fire to communicate and make sense of complex information. We call these artificial brains an AI agent. And then we put these AI agents into a satellite driving simulator that we turned into a video game by adding our own custom scoring system. To teach them, we're using a method called reinforcement learning, which is kind of like training your dog with positive and negative reinforcement. The AI doesn't get peanut butter treats, though, when it does something right. We tell it what it likes by giving it a positive score for things we want it to do and a negative score for things that we don't want it to do. So consider training a spacecraft to dock. We might give it points as it gets closer into the docking point and a huge reward at the end for successfully docking, while at the same time making it lose points for taking too long or using too much fuel. At first, the agent does a bunch of random things. Imagine handing a video game controller to a child and they just start pushing all the buttons and randomly moving the joystick. This is essentially what the AI is doing until all of a sudden it gets a point. And it realizes, hey, when I do this, I get a point. So it remembers that in this trial and error approach as it's trying thousands or millions of times to do the dock. And it exploits that knowledge by trying similar things, while at the same time exploring other possible actions to see if there's more ways to get points. The ultimate goal over many, many simulations is to get the highest score possible in the game. And it does this by finding the optimal action to take for any possible observation that it has of the simulation. One of the biggest challenges that we have is that AI is still a little bit more of an art than a science today. So the first thing that we have to do is simplify. Rather than having a complex model of the spacecraft with a lot of very detailed descriptions, like the figure on the left, we make a lot of simplifying assumptions to end up with more of a rough outline and approximation of what the satellite would be, like the woman and the figure on the right. By doing this, we can test out all of our theories on simple models and build up a theory of the best way to do it before we apply it to more complex models. Next, we have to add safety. One way to do this is to penalize the agent for making unsafe decisions. However, penalizing the agent doesn't always guarantee that it's going to make a safe choice. It also can have some unintended consequences. For instance, if we gave the agent a huge penalty for a collision during the satellite docking process, it may never learn to dock because it associates getting close to the docking point with a large penalty. The difference between docking and crashing is velocity. It's a fine line. So if penalizing it during the training process isn't enough, what can we do? My team is building up a safe training approach for satellite autonomy. Think of it like driver's ed for space AI. In driver's ed, the instructor has a brake on her side. The instructor monitors the student, and if at any point in time they're going to do something dangerous, they can intervene by hitting their brake at the last minute to avoid a collision. In this analogy, we're trying to train AI in the role of a student, and we're building emergency safety systems in the role of an instructor. Most driver's ed instructors are pretty laid back, which is good because how could a student learn if the instructor was constantly hitting on the brake? We're harnessing that relaxed posture of a driver's ed instructor in building our safety systems. because we want the AI to be able to explore as much of the possible options that it can take while still preventing it from making unsafe choices and learning unsafe behavior. When a teenager is learning to drive, they have to prove their trustworthiness to society, and perhaps more importantly, to their parents or guardians that have the ability to give them the keys to the car. They do this by demonstrating their capabilities in the real world under supervision. In this analogy, spacecraft operators are like the parents that are monitoring the AI. Just like parents, they're understandably hesitant to hand over the keys because the consequences of the student making a mistake are so high that it could result in the loss of this one-of-a-kind, exquisite space asset. So instead, what we're doing is we're having the AI provide courses of action to the operators to select from. Then over time, when the AI has consistently shown that it's able to do the job safely, it can earn its learner's permit and be able to take some actions on its own. When humans learn to drive, one of the hardest parts is learning how to drive in rare events and off-nominal conditions, like snow, ice, and heavy traffic. Similarly, a spacecraft needs to know how to operate safely around other spacecraft, as well as in the presence of faults. Spacecraft need to know what to do in an emergency. Once we've proven that it's possible to train an AI to command a spacecraft, we can ask other important, more philosophical questions, like when to trust it. Safety is freedom from harm, and trust is a willingness to accept vulnerability. When a spacecraft operator trusts an AI to be in command of their spacecraft, they're vulnerable to the possibility that the spacecraft, when an operator trusts an AI to be in command of the spacecraft, they're vulnerable to the possibility that the AI makes a bad decision and damages an exquisite one-of-a-kind satellite. Imagine a Space Force guardian in mission control with a checklist. The AI is telling her one thing, but her gut is telling her something else. Is there something that the AI sees that the operator isn't aware of? Is there something that the operator knows, some context that they have that the AI doesn't have? When does the operator trust the AI? And when does the AI trust the operator? If the operators never trust AI, or don't trust it enough, it could limit the number of spacecraft in orbit or how quickly they can respond to threats. On the flip side, we've actually found that in a lot of cases, humans overtrust AI in robotics. There was a study a few years ago that looked at participants in a simulated emergency, and they would follow the robots in dead ends and in circles, despite a number of clearly marked emergency exit signs. So maybe that scene in The Office where Michael yells, "The machine knows where it's going," as he follows his GPS straight into the lake, wasn't that far off. Mitigating brittle AI by building safety systems and appropriate teaming with human operators is an extremely difficult challenge. However, it's worth the time and effort because a spacecraft that can reliably and safely navigate space on its own will help to make the lantern brighter for exploration. Together, humans and AI can explore further than we could on our own. Thank you.
Dr. Hobbs, an amazing scientist and also amazing artist. I mean, those portraits there. Incredible. And one thing you might not know about me, Jeff, is I'm also an artist. And there's one particular piece I've been working on for a few years now. I don't know if you can get a close-up on that. This is Self-Portrait by Darren Raspa.
Very lifelike.
Yeah, thank you. So,
you need some AI.
Yeah, I think so. So we've heard about autonomy. We've heard about enhancing the human body. Now let's shift to a discussion involving the mind. Throughout history, warfighters have put themselves in dangerous situations, both physically and mentally. Warfighters continuously push boundaries and test limits to save others in enhanced conditions. Here at the lab, our scientists and our engineers are no different.
Well, yes, certainly, and the lab has seen its share of cutting-edge medical researchers who expand boundaries, and one amazing example in the past is Colonel John Paul Stapp. Now, Colonel Stapp had seen the suffering of airmen who had been injured or killed in aircraft and automobile crashes, and he felt personally compelled to do something about it. So Colonel Stapp in the late 40s and 1950s, he and his team used rocket sleds to conduct deceleration tests to make better harnesses and safer ejection seats. They rode rocket sleds. It's not a usual day in the office. Now, Dr. Stapp personally rode on some of these runs, and he traveled as fast as 632 miles per hour, set a land speed record, but more importantly, experienced the effect of crashing an automobile into a brick wall at more than 100 miles an hour. He is one brave scientist, no doubt. Now, Colonel Stapp also pushed really hard to have these harnesses installed in automobiles. You know, we call them seat belts. And as a direct result of his efforts, in the late 1960s, the federal seatbelt mandate was signed. And he was actually there at the signing. So when all of you get in your cars today and you put on that life-saving seatbelt, understand that that's the direct result of Colonel Stapp and his team. I mean, it's an amazing example of how technology developed in the lab doesn't just help military, it helps all of us. And you know, I'm sure that some of you know someone whose life was saved by a seatbelt, and maybe that life was yours. And that's a result of the work that's done in the lab. Now, our next speaker, Dr. Melissa Wilson, has also worked long and hard to alleviate suffering. Dr. Wilson is a research nurse. She spent 25 years as a bedside nurse. She also spent many years caring for critical care patients. And to her great credit, she was recently named a fellow of the American Academy of Nursing. I can't tell you how much fun it is to stand up here and talk about these amazing people. Dr. Wilson's goal is to ensure that our military healthcare providers don't suffer as a result of their difficult work. So she studies moral distress in these military healthcare providers, and she is developing personalized intervention techniques. So please help me welcome Dr. Melissa Wilson to the stage, and we'll hear more about how she's helping our nation's military healthcare providers.
So you've probably heard stories about the extraordinary situations healthcare providers encountered as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. But have you ever thought about what our military healthcare providers face every day? Here's a look into some of our Air Force teams hard at work.
Around 105, ready voltage. They have no ID access. This gunshot would have approximately 45 minutes. How many packs total do we have? If you get through little rifle, okay. Your legs will be lower.
Now imagine you are one of these healthcare providers. You've just been assigned to safely care and transport several injured military members on a flight from a deployed location to a hospital. In preparation for the flight, you and your team have already worked for hours to pick up, prep, and load patients and equipment onto a C-130 cargo plane. A plane that was made to transport cargo, but not made to transport this most precious cargo, our injured military members. The team tries to anticipate everything it will need for the next 8 hours, equipment, medications, that the patients and crew will need for the next 8 hours in this makeshift flying emergency room. It's dark on the plane. We fly at night to lessen the chances of enemy fire. And because it's a noisy cargo plane, the only way you can communicate outside of hand signals to your crew is by the headset that you wear. Once all the patients, equipment, and crew are loaded and ready to get on the plane takes off. You've placed your most critical patients nearest to your seat so that you can view their vital signs and heart rhythm on the monitor displays. And even though you have to be strapped in for the takeoff, it gives you a little peace of mind knowing you have these vital rhythms on display, even when you can't touch the patient. So you anxiously await for the pilot to give the all clear over the headset so you can begin caring for our military members. Next thing you know, you look up and the patient's monitor is reading what you know to be a lethal rhythm. Your extensive knowledge and instincts kick in. Check the patient, start CPR, deliver an electrical shock. But wait, you're strapped in. What do? Defy the pilot's instructions, risking your safety to deliver these life-saving interventions to this injured military member? But what happens if you're hurt? Then you're of no use to all the patients and the crew on the flight. But the patient, the rhythm, it's lethal. And the best chances of surviving are delivering these life-saving interventions that you would do only if you could get to the patient. In the midst of chaos like this, our military healthcare providers make frequent life and death decisions, not only for patients, but for themselves and our fellow members, leaving a lasting effect on our military mission. Moral distress is the hardship that arises when we are unable, or when a provider is unable to deliver the best care possible due to internal or external barriers. If a healthcare provider is unable to get relief in these types of situations, moral distress not only adversely impacts the patients, but also the providers, our organization, our military health system, the entire system, all the way from the patient to the organization as a whole. My team has been studying the impact of these situations long before the COVID pandemic brought it into the spotlight. Moral distress. Sorry, unlike General Pawlikowski, I don't have that memory. As a nurse scientist in AFRL, I have been able to research, had the opportunity to research moral distress and the impact on our military health system. My team is committed to finding the best interventions to prevent, mitigate, and treat moral distress in the common healthcare encounters that we know our military providers will experience. Before coming to the United States Air Force in 2014, I researched moral distress in the civilian sector, where it is more commonly studied. And actually, until a few years ago, moral distress wasn't even acknowledged in the world of military healthcare providers. There have been studies of similar conditions such as battle fatigue, burnout, moral injury, and PTSD in warfighters. But these are more about naming the injury after the experiences, whereas with moral distress, we have an opportunity to intervene early to prevent these long-term conditions from negatively impacting our people, our health system, and our overall mission. Have you ever met a distant, cold, or perhaps detached provider? We know with moral distress that we know that with military health or with healthcare providers, they don't generally start out their professional careers aloof, but actually distance themselves as a form of self-protection. Moral distress can also look like anger, guilt, sadness. Right now, many of our healthcare providers are doing everything they can to hold it all together. Moral distress, even though it manifests within the provider, we know the impact is far-reaching. Nursing is the science of caring. And as a nurse scientist, I bring the unique perspective of a nurse with the eyes of a scientist to enhance readiness and resilience of our military healthcare system and its people. If you see me around AFRL, you won't see me wearing the official military uniform, but I too have a pretty cool uniform. A dear friend gave me this, and I agree to an extent that my years of healthcare experience have given me some superpowers. But every superhero has a limit, and for the people delivering healthcare, our kryptonite is the perception that healthcare providers are invincible, indestructible, and can put themselves out there repeatedly in care situations and not be impacted as a result of our work. We are not indestructible. Don't forget to dispose of all hope, is the warning written on a wall on display at the United States Air Force Museum. This artifact was a piece of the airline terminal wall that greeted incoming service members in the Middle East country of Qatar, where many of our deployed service members were stationed in recent conflicts. Dispose of all hope. Moral distress results when there is no hope or relief within a distressing professional encounter. This is the point where injury occurs and where we must intervene to restore hope to those barely holding it all together. Our mission in the United States Air Force is to deliver trusted care anywhere. An important component of this mission is empowering our providers to deliver the best care possible, and the system removing barriers to enable trusted care delivered anywhere. My team and I are collaborating, or are researching to find the best comprehensive and personalized interventions to prevent, mitigate, and treat moral distress in our military healthcare providers. We are collaborating with our sister services, academia, and industry. And while ideas have started to rise up as a part of this initial research, more robust studies are needed to reach sound, science-based recommendations. We need a multifaceted approach addressing the person, the team, the organization, and whole system directives. Personalized because each care provider is unique and brings a special set of characteristics to care situations, which then translates to meeting your individualized needs as a patient. While we are studying moral distress in healthcare providers right now, we anticipate broad application to other caring professions, such as teachers, police officers, and social workers, to name a few. To those who are listening with no direct connection to a healthcare provider or caring organization, but feel compelled to do something because you recognize it matters to all of us to protect these caring people and caring organizations, pick a friend, family member, neighborhood healthcare facility, or even a healthcare-themed social media board, and reach out and say thanks. Flood them with encouragement and messages that say, I care. Whatever you do, it doesn't have to be lofty, just be relentless in caring for the ones that care the most. And if you're a healthcare provider, keep holding it all together. The last few years in healthcare have been especially tough, and we honor you for continuing to care despite incredibly difficult circumstances. Don't give up. We are fighting for you. We are advocating for research to address moral distress and advocating to restore hope within our military healthcare system. I promise you, superheroes, we are fighting for you, one team, one fight. Thank you very much.
Wow, well, that's incredible, Dr. Wilson, and thank you for your service and for the service of our healthcare workers, both at the lab and who are deployed with the service around the world today. You know, we ask our warfighters to do an incredible thing, and without folks like Dr. Wilson, that wouldn't be possible. So there's a lot to take in the past little bit here, right, Jeff? And I say it's time to take a little break. What do you think?
Got some maybe 15 minutes or so.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So while we're all taking our break, there's the coolest quiz that our public affairs professionals put together. And there's a QR code. You can check that out. Find out which historical figure you are. And we'll see you in 15 minutes.
See you soon, guys.
I looked up my web.
Really?
Yeah, come on, guys. All I know is I better let the Wookiee win. Well, so far today, we've heard about autonomy in the Air Force's past. We heard Dr. Hobbs talk about autonomy in the future. And our next speaker, Dr. Jade King, is going to talk about autonomy in the future. Now, throughout history, scientists and engineers have created capabilities that people at the time thought were science fiction. And I can't think of a better example of the many as the Wright brothers. And now, the Wright brothers were utterly ridiculed by the press and the public for this crazy idea that people could fly. But that didn't stop them. They thought big, they pursued their dreams, and Darren, thanks to their ideas, who they were, and their perseverance, we certainly can fly.
That's right, Jeff. And that idea of perseverance, that's key in everything, right? And the lab has surmounted feats people once thought were impossible. Things like supersonic flight, space travel, lasers, microwave defense networks. These are all in the realm of the possible because of the work of the lab. Now, today, artificial intelligence, or AI, can be considered by some to be the stuff of fantasy or science fiction. But AI is in the realm of the possible because of the work of our scientists and engineers. Now, our next guest is working on these futuristic technologies. She's a research psychologist in AFRL's 711th Human Performance Wing who works on human behavior in relation to technology and aviation, who specifically focuses on human autonomous agent teaming and training, which is kind of a fancy way of saying humans and robots working together. So hopefully more R2-D2 than HAL or the Cylons. But to hear about the future to the path for technological greatness that's unfolding before us, let's hear from Dr. Jade King and the future of technological greatness and what that's required for our scientists and engineers. Dr. King.
You and your teammate just completed a spacewalk, and now it's time to settle in for the night. As you begin to drift to sleep, you hear a loud scream. You rush to the aid of your teammate who is doubled over in pain. Before you can utter a word, the spacecraft's smart agent, Ren, alerts you that your teammate is suffering from appendicitis, and immediate surgery is necessary for your teammate's survival. You've been trained in basic medical procedures before, but your teammate is a medical doctor. Communication to Johnson Space Center is always 20 minutes too late, and you need to act fast. You think back to your previous training as you help your teammate lie down. While strapping your teammate in the operating table and inserting the IV, Ren lets you know that your teammate is ready for the operation. He pulls up your vitals for your teammate and says, "The vitals are stable. If you approve, I can start administering the anesthesia and antibiotics." You visually confirm the information Ren gave you by scanning the system monitors and say, "I approve." Ren starts administering the anesthesia and antibiotics and pulls up a diagram of your teammate's body indicating there are no other abnormal complications. Ren is projecting a perforated line on your teammate's lower abdomen, marking where you should cut. You make your incision, insert the probe, and now a video stream from inside the abdomen is streaming on the system monitors. Ren quickly identifies the appendix and states, "I have 95% confidence I can make the precise incisions needed for you to remove the appendix." You let out a sigh of relief and respond, "Approved." Ren makes 3 tiny incisions, and you remove the appendix and stitch up your teammate. Your friend is saved, and the mission can continue. In this fictitious example, the autonomous agent Ren and its human counterpart work together to save their teammate's life. The capabilities Ren exhibited that were advantageous, the autonomous diagnosis, adaptive aiding, natural seamless collaboration, and effective task sharing are all actions built upon the foundation of good and essential inferencing. And these capabilities are necessary if we want to achieve effective human autonomous teaming. If we want to win the future fight, we need to support systems that do not just function as a tool, but can instead team with our airmen to enable dynamic, quick, and strategic decision-making and mission execution. The trouble is, autonomous agents capable of this level of inferencing simply do not exist yet. At AFRL, my team focuses on the inference challenge within human autonomous teaming, teaching agents to draw conclusions from evidence. We are currently developing an ensemble model capable of leveraging auditory, visual, and system information for the improved inferencing of humans' goals, actions, and even the prediction of future actions. We call it Vision Inference Action, VIA. Our work is still in the early development stages. And even though we're making strides, we are still a long way from actualizing the scenario I just described with Ren and the emergency space surgery. Even within inference, our small piece of the human autonomy teaming puzzle, there are multiple technical challenges my team is working to investigate to enable agents' inferencing of its human teammates. We've been developing our agent with an emphasis on mission planning. In this next scene, let's see how VIA leverages various stimuli to understand an unfolding situation and ultimately infer its human teammates' disposition. A mission commander is strategizing when to release his aircraft to engage targets surrounded by surface-to-air missiles. His deputy commander rushes in the room with new information that the enemy has advanced north from its previous location and thunderstorms are coming in from the northwest. The mission commander ponders his next move. Human observers understand that the mission commander is currently in the crosshairs of a decision, having to weigh multiple possible options and playing out various alternate solutions in his mind. We understand this, but how? And could an autonomous agent understand the situation in the scene the same way you and I do? Let's look at the scenario through VIA's eyes. There are various complications and technical challenges to building the foundation for inference when it comes to human autonomous teaming. The first being world knowledge. Before VIA takes in any information from the world around it, it already has a model built about the world around it, similar to the models that humans have of their environment. And most of us have an understanding of the scene. We know the roles of the teammates, that the mission commander is in a position of authority, and that the overall goal is to win and maintain air superiority. We've built this understanding through interactions and learning as we've survived and existed in this world. And we've been observing and storing interactions since birth. And by doing so, we built an understanding of tasks, roles, skills, and goals. Autonomous agents can build on our collection of knowledge by training on the data we produce and through models we develop for it built on tasks and specific domain knowledge. In our case, we built a model of mission planning tasks within VIA based on observation and interview data. Now that VIA's world knowledge is up to date, VIA is ready to tackle the next challenge in inferencing: processing visual and interface stimuli. In the beginning scene, recall a man in the mission planning room. This is where the first inference occurs. By using the cameras in the room, VIA is able to notice the man in his fatigues, the insignia on his fatigues, and the critical information he's paying attention to. VIA is able to infer that this man is the mission commander, and based on his body position, that he's facing the map. Next, VIA processes information from the mission planning software, and VIA registers the 8 planned routes, total of 16 entities, and 9 targets dispersed in the southeast. And based on the tasks completed in the mission planning software, VIA is able to infer that the mission commander is currently in the process of game planning, a strategic phase in mission planning. Suddenly, another airman enters the room. She's a young woman with a sense of urgency. VIA notices the difference between her insignia and the first airman, and VIA is able to infer that this is the deputy commander. So with VIA's world knowledge and the information it learned from watching the scene and processing the mission planning software, VIA has a base level understanding of the current situation and is ready to integrate another imperative source needed for inferencing. Inference through communication. The deputy commander updates the mission commander. Excuse me, sir, we just got word from Intel that the enemy has advanced north from its previous location and thunderstorms are coming in from the northwest. The mission commander responds copy, faces the map, raises his brow, and strokes his chin. This is the first opportunity for VIA to interpret audio information through natural language processing to understand the deputy commander's utterances. VIA will use this newly extracted information to update its understanding of the current scenario, and in response, depict the new enemy position and storm cells on the map. VIA is now ready to tackle the final challenge in inferencing: data consolidation and inference. With VIA's understanding of the entities on the map, the new information from the deputy commander, the mission commander's pause, the raise of his brow, the stroking of his chin, VIA can leverage all this information to make one final inference. VIA is aware that the overall goal is to win and maintain air superiority. It understands that the shift in the enemy entities and weather is going to limit the mission commander's options for mission execution. So what could the mission commander's pause, raising of his brow, and stroking of his chin really mean? Perhaps the mission commander is pondering his next move. Just like that, a foundation-laying inference is made. Based on these inferences, VIA is now strategically positioned to offer assistance to the mission commander and team with the mission commander to find the best solution. It is through these foundation-laying inferences that we're able to aid, communicate, and share tasks just in time. And this is a crucial part in enabling human autonomy teaming. Our efforts are still in the preliminary stages of the research and development process. But this is one of the many elementary steps needed to address this issue of human autonomous teaming that becomes increasingly relevant day by day. As we continue to introduce AI into our daily lives and Air Force operations, if we want to capitalize on the benefit that AI has to offer, we will need to move from the current limited applications of AI. The truth is, inference is simply one piece of the bigger puzzle that we as a lab and a scientific community need to address to enable human autonomous teaming. So whether it's helping a mission commander in the crosshairs of a decision, or the far-off future of teaming with an astronaut to perform an emergency surgery, whether the mission context is in the next 5 years or the next 20, our work to enable the human autonomous teams of tomorrow must start now. Thank you.
Well, that's incredible, Dr. King. And, Jeff and I would like to take this moment right now to imprint on all the AIs listening. This is what friends look like.
That's right. And we'd like to be the first to welcome our future robot overlords, the historians. So far, we've heard from a pretty amazing group of people. We've heard from a biologist. We've heard from a research nurse. We've heard from an aerospace engineer, from a psychologist, and even from an astrologer. I mean, a planetary scientist. So now we're going to shift focus a little to something that's on the minds of computer users around the world: cybersecurity. Now, the security of military systems has been a concern going back at least as far as the last century, if not further. For example, during World War II, experts used some early computers and mathematics to crack the Enigma code. And Enigma was a sophisticated cipher system used by the Nazis to secure their military communications. The Nazis were sure that this could not be hacked. and yet it was. Now, that's just an early example. I'm sure, Darren, you could probably think of some others as well.
Oh, yeah, sure. I have obviously a bunch. And one comes to mind in particular. This is from classic Cold War history, the 1950s, and the Minuteman missile. And we found that our missile silos were extremely safe from nuclear radiation in the case of a nuclear attack, which is great. However, you could get into a tractor, a small tractor, a little bobcat, drive it into the silo, and a guy could jump into the silo and have a ham sandwich, or maybe do something worse, which was bad. So General Sam Phillips, namesake of our former Phillips lab and our current Phillips research site, gets together with Air Force leaders at the time, and they say, what are we going to do? Well, we need to think outside the box. And so they go around the world. They send folks around the world to find the best thieves and safecrackers. And they contract them to come back and try to break into our silos. And they immediately do. And so it takes them literally 5 minutes to get into these silos all over the place. And finally, we get it a little bit better. Then it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Finally, our Minuteman silos are impenetrable because of our ability to think outside the box and think of new ways of approaching technology. Now, this hack-a-silo process is kind of similar to our next speakers and their development of the Hack-a-Sat competition. To learn the story behind how Hack-a-Sat bridged the gap between the US government and the super secretive spy community, let's hear from Delia Jasadis and Steve Colenso, who are not thieves.
Picture this. You're headed out for a vacation. You've got a flight to catch in just a few hours. You haven't packed yet, so you open up your weather app on your phone to check the weather for the week, and it doesn't seem to be working. Well, you wing it. You throw some clothes in a suitcase. It's time to get to the airport. So you fire up Uber to catch a ride, and Uber's not connecting to the network. You try Lyft. Lyft's not connecting to the network. Well, with no time to waste, it looks like you're driving yourself to the airport. So you grab your suitcase, you jump in your car, and you fire up GPS to find the quickest route. And that is just giving you the searching circle. Well, after tons of frustration, you manage to make it to the airport, only to walk in and find that all flights are canceled and the airline systems are down. No rebooking, no vacation. The satellites that enable our mobile way of life have been compromised by just a few keystrokes and some malicious code.
Satellites are one of the connective tissues of our modern world, but they are also quite vulnerable. Because of this, the causes and effects of those vulnerabilities can be felt by each and every one of us around the globe. In order to understand how to protect these important satellite systems, we must open our aperture to vulnerability despite our human nature to self-preserve and hide when we feel vulnerable. That was the conclusion that the Hack-a-Sat team came to when we took on the task of trying to figure out how to prevent a satellite hack from threatening the security and prosperity of both our nation and globe. We didn't have straightforward answers, but we did have a crazy idea of where to go to start finding them.
There is one place where innovation is at the forefront of security, and the weaknesses of technology are constantly being challenged, and that is at DEF CON. DEF CON is a community-driven environment where over 30,000 of the world's most inventive and creative hackers, reverse engineers, security researchers, and hobbyists alike come together to hack and break and tinker with all sorts of technologies, find their weaknesses, and improve their security. If you're a hacker, you know all about DEF CON. By enlisting hackers in an open and transparent manner, the Hack-a-Sat team set out to build a community centered around access and a common goal, all in the name of space cybersecurity. So we put our plan to the test.
This approach to satellite security was novel, and the task ahead was daunting, because hackers, security researchers, and satellite experts operate in different circles. But unifying these three communities will have something great to offer for each other for the benefit of mankind. It's like inviting the lock pickers to work with the lock makers to inform how to build better locks, thus reducing crime. The approach was risky, but we knew there was a means to the end. On the other hand, We had major organizations and leaders telling us there was absolutely no way that we were letting US governments be touched by hackers. They gave us mountains of reasons why: international trade restrictions, legalities, security clearances, proprietary technology, and the list goes on. But we really needed to normalize the conversation around weakness in order to build resilience in these important satellite systems versus protecting a culture of preservation through secrecy.
To the commercial world, this is not a new concept. Many companies from the automotive industry, medical, biotechnology, voting, Internet of Things, they bring their technologies to DEF CON to let hackers peek under the hood and find their weaknesses. Hackasat was the first time that the Department of the Air Force joined the commercial industry by hosting a satellite hacking competition incentivized by prizes and the novelty of hacking highly inaccessible technology without going to jail. While Department of Defense organizations had attended DEF CON in the past, this new concept of openness in the name of security ran counter to how the department traditionally approaches this topic.
Satellites aren't like other technologies where you can go to a big box store, buy one off the shelf to tinker with. They're exquisite, inaccessible, expensive systems that are hard for the research community to get their hands on. Only an extremely limited number of thoroughly vetted experts with high security clearances have access to evaluate these technologies. So can you imagine trying to give hackers access? Everything we were trying to do with Hackasat ran counter to the foundational principles of national security. But things are changing in the 21st century, and access to space is cheaper than it's ever been. Satellites are smaller, less expensive to build. There's even ride-sharing opportunities to launch your satellite, which makes outer space the next big major commercial investment for many new companies.
With more and more companies having access to space and doing more things in space, who's looking out for the security of these systems and safeguarding our modern society? The proliferation of space makes the globe's way of life vulnerable, not just any one country or community. And if nations and companies are only looking to protect their own interests and bottom lines, they could be the next single point of failure in our collective way of life. Well, the Hackasat team was not willing to let that day happen on our watches. We had to look at this problem from a worldview to preserve the way of the world.
Challenging the status quo is risky business. However, it can lead to meaningful rewards. Yet everyone was opposed to it. Supervisors said no.
Lawyers said no.
Satellite operators said no.
Space organizations said no.
Space industry said no.
Other government organizations that we can't name in this forum said absolutely not.
And these weren't soft no's, they were hard capital letter N-O. But constraints are the precursors to solutions. And culture change doesn't happen overnight. It became a full contact sport. Our team cried together. We laughed, argued, debated, celebrated, some even quit. But at the end of the day, the mission survivors came out stronger than ever. And Hackasat persevered, bringing the topic of satellite security to dinner parties and newsstands around the globe.
By facilitating the participation of over 10,000 international hackers and millions of spectators across industry, academia, governments, and the press, Hackasat has already returned dividends to the Department of the Air Force and the space community at large. Satellite operators have now witnessed what it looks like when a real satellite hack is happening on your system in the moment. A global community of experts in cybersecurity are now linked up and on teams with experts in astrophysics and aerospace to coalesce around where the information security loopholes in these systems lie. Brilliant people sharing their findings in the name of space cybersecurity. Vulnerabilities have been identified and vulnerability disclosure programs have been developed. A novel training curriculum for our space operators is being established as we speak. Software and hardware developers in this sector are beginning to evaluate security in an entirely new way. And most recently, the US Justice Department announced it will not bring charges under federal hacking laws against security researchers who act in good faith.
Let's face it, our world is entangled by complicated technology, and opening up is scary. But losing access to space cannot happen. And sustaining our interconnected way of life is critical. We have a global imperative on our hands, one that every cell phone using, traveling, bank leveraging human on planet Earth will be impacted by: satellite security.
Through crowdsourced problem solving and an increasing tolerance to openness, there is now a global alliance that aims to tackle this challenge, and it starts with Hackasat.
Thank you.
Security forces, they're right there.
Yeah,
Julie
right there.
and Steve, walking up there, yeah, right now. They sure don't seem like criminals.
No.
So today we've talked about several historical figures, right? Hap Arnold, von Karman, Bernd Balk, and the Wright brothers. Now we're going to bring in Jimmy Doolittle, known for his Doolittle raids.
Yeah, Darren, a lot of people know about Jimmy Doolittle only for his famous raid on Japan in 1942, but he really did so much more. Jimmy Doolittle was the first to fly an outside loop. He was the first to fly a complete blind flight. He was even the commander of the mighty 8th Air Force in the strategic bombing campaign against Germany in World War II. But in spite of all his accomplishments, perhaps one of the most important ones were about gasoline. So Jimmy Doolittle in the 1930s was the driving force behind creating affordable, high-octane gasoline. And the U.S. and our allies used this high-octane gasoline in World War II, which gave us a performance advantage over the Axis and helped us win the war. Now, just like fueling aircraft, how we fuel spacecraft has changed over time due to the need for increased performance requirements and advances in science.
That's right. You know, for a guy named Doolittle, he sure did a lot.
He's a dad. That's a dad joke. Well done, sir. Well done, sir.
Sorry,
He's
General.
coming from out of
I'm
town.
sorry.
He's not normally in this area, so.
So rockets have used hydrazine to power them for the past 60 years, but AFRL developed Ascent, or Advanced Spacecraft Energetic Non-Toxic Propellant, is the fuel of the future. Our next speaker is a physical chemist who leverages his chemistry expertise to develop next-generation fuels. Let's hear what he has to say about using Ascent to power our Space Force by launching architectures into space, all while increasing performance, saving money, and making load operations safer. Let's hear from Dr. Stephen Chambro.
Imagine you get in your car in the morning to come into work. You're low on fuel, so you stop by your favorite gas station to fuel up your tank. Now imagine that before you even get out of your car, you have to put this on, and you have to clear everyone away from the gas station for a quarter-mile radius. If you spill even a single drop of the fuel, you have to get a special hazardous spill kit to clean it all up. By the time that you've finished filling your tank, given the all clear, and gotten back into your work clothes, it's 3 p.m., not your typical day, right? This process is actually very similar to how hydrazine fuels are currently loaded onto many rockets, satellites, and spacecraft. It's time-consuming and expensive. Primarily due to the high performance and long-term stability, hydrazine fuels have been used successfully in rocket propulsion for over 60 years. However, hydrazine is not only toxic, but it's also corrosive, flammable, and a probable carcinogen. Very short exposure to hydrazine can cause death or serious residual injury, even if prompt medical attention is given. Hydrazine has a high vapor pressure. Have you ever spilled gasoline and you remember that smell? That's because gasoline also has a high vapor pressure, and you can smell it when it smells. When it spills, excuse me. So the hydrazine's toxicity makes it very dangerous if it's spilled and vapors are inhaled when loading into the satellite before launch. The safety precautions involve first clearing the launch pad, and then the personnel loading the hydrazine have to wear level A self-contained breathing suits in case the hydrazine is spilled. This is time-consuming, and it costs around $1 million per launch. Between 1968 and 2007, there were over 40 spills associated with loading hydrazine fuels, the largest being 74 gallons in 2005. At the AFRL Rocket Lab, we're developing new liquid propellants to replace hydrazine to make the fuel easier and safer to load. Our goal is to find a hydrazine replacement that can both increase the performance, namely the density-specific impulse, by at least 50%, and also reduce the propulsion system mass by 40%. These improvement goals are directly related to space superiority, resilience, and the sustainment of our space assets. In order to reduce the vapor toxicity of our propellants, our chemists developed ionic liquid propellants. We use chemistry to reduce the melting points of our propellants that is similar to putting salt on the roads to melt the ice or to making old-fashioned ice cream. Now, ionic liquids are very similar to salt or sodium chloride in that they are comprised completely of ions, which are very hard to vaporize. Okay, I want you to imagine the smell from a salt shaker. What does that smell like? Well, it doesn't smell because salt doesn't evaporate. This is why you can put a salt shaker on a table and leave it for years, and while it might clump together into a single frustrating mass, it's not going to evaporate away. But how do we make salt into a liquid? Turns out you have to heat salt to above 800 degrees Celsius in order to get it to melt. Ions really want to stick together, even more so than molecular liquids like water, which is why they have no vapor pressure. Therefore, if they spill, you can simply sweep or wipe them up. In these new ionic liquids, the ions are designed to be big and greasy and floppy so they don't stick together so fiercely like they do in salt. We can reduce their melting points to room temperature and even lower while retaining the benefits of the ionic nature of salt, namely zero vapor pressure. But how do we know which ionic liquids make good propellants? There could be as many as 10 to the 18th different combinations of ionic liquids to choose from. Figuring out where to start is like being told to pick a card from a deck with a trillion cards in it. That might take a while. At the AFRL Rocket Lab, we want to replace hydrazine-based hypergolic bipropellants, which is where two stable liquids, one a fuel and the other an oxidizer, mix and ignite spontaneously. The oxidizer is necessary because fire needs oxygen to burn, and there's no oxygen in space. Here you see an ionic liquid droplet fall into a container of oxidizer and ignition. I love that video. So the main benefit of this is that you can actually turn it on and off like your kitchen faucet. This is in contrast to solid rocket motors where once you light them, they burn until they consume all the fuel and they cannot be turned off. Another advantage of hypergolic bipropellants is that they don't need an external ignition source, which greatly simplifies rocket design. The first hypergolic ionic liquid was developed at the AFRL Rocket Lab back in 2007. We found that one type of ionic liquid shows hypergolic ignition and has short ignition delay times, a metric that's critical in assessing spacecraft maneuverability and response time. Since then, over 1,100 peer-reviewed articles have been published on this topic. It remains a topic of intense international interest. Ionic liquids are great for almost every kind of hydrazine replacement. In 2019, a SpaceX Falcon Heavy launched from Kennedy Space Center carried the AFRL's green propellant into orbit. Held within NASA's Green Propellant Infusion Mission Satellite's fuel tanks was the ionic liquid formulation with the very government-sounding acronym ASCENT. Not only was this new fuel's performance successful, it provided a 50% increase in density-specific impulse, which is similar to getting a 50% improvement in miles per gallon in your car. On top of that, ASCENT showed its softer, gentler side when a fuel occurred during the fueling of the spacecraft. In this case, they only needed paper towels and water to clean this up. There's no clearing of the site, no hazmat suits, no scheduled delays, no millions of dollars wasted. The benefits of the new types of rocket fuels go beyond just better gas mileage and easy environment-friendly cleanup. This also opens up the possibility for a single fuel to power both the low efficiency but high thrust rapid maneuvers and high efficiency, steady, low thrust propulsion that satellite operations demand. On November 15th, 2021, Russia demonstrated their ability to shoot down a satellite by destroying their Cosmos 1408 rocket, 1408 satellite, using an anti-satellite missile. China, India, and Israel also have these anti-satellite capabilities. The threat to our military and communication satellites, typically costing hundreds of millions of dollars each, is no longer merely theoretical. There's also the possible threat of collisions with ever-increasing number of objects in orbit around Earth, including defunct satellites and rocket booster fragments. As of January 2021, there are over 21,000 artificial objects in orbit above the Earth, including 4,450 operational satellites. Between adversarial threats and the increasing possibility of collisions with space junk, it's critical that we have rapid maneuverability capabilities in our strategic satellites. Rapid maneuvers require high thrust, think horsepower, chemical propulsion that can quickly ignite and burn, taking advantage of the rapid release of heat and gases. But this is inefficient and can quickly burn up all the fuel on board. Satellites also require high efficiency propulsion, think miles per gallon, for orbital maintenance and for attitude control without using too much of the limited fuel on board. Current systems have separate fuel tanks and hardware for each propulsion mode, but Ascent has the capability to deliver for both propulsion modes. A single tank of Ascent can power both chemical and electric propulsion, enabling rapid maneuvers when necessary and efficient, slower adjustments over the lifetime of the satellite. This concept of multi-mode can bypass the need for multiple propellant storage systems and reduce the mass and volume of the satellite, enabling larger payloads and longer satellite lifetimes. This multi-mode concept is similar to a hybrid vehicle with a single fuel tank and multiple drivetrain options, sort of an eco mode versus a sport mode. Ascent has a 50% increase in density-specific impulse versus hydrazine. Not only can Ascent potentially be used in any space vehicle, but it gets better mileage and fits into a smaller tank. Imagine getting 50% improvement in your miles per gallon or shrinking your tank by half. This pioneering work has the potential to greatly improve the safety of rocket fuels and has fundamentally changed the culture of how we approach and balance the risks and payoff in propellant design. Ascent not only allows us to streamline the fueling process, get better mileage, shrink our fuel tanks, and reduce the hardware necessary for our strategic satellites. Thank you.
Great to see you, Dr. Chambreau, and we missed you last month at the AFRL Long Hair Brotherhood Retreat. I just wanted to say that.
Some of us can't be in the club, Darren.
Yeah, you should see his next generation shampoo and conditioner. Now, for the Air Force to develop the superior technologies like you've heard about today, STEM education is key. And recruiting top young talent to come work for us has an historic influence. And this goes back to Hap Arnold and von Karman discussing this back when they first met in the 1930s. And one really successful STEM story comes out of Texas. And this is a guy named Frank Molina. Extraordinarily bright young man, but he's from a poor immigrant family in Texas, and he has no money, and his family has no money. And his community sees this, and they all raise enough money so that Molina can go to the California Institute of Technology, and he becomes the first student, or one of the first students, of none other than von Karman himself. And Molina goes on to become one of the pioneers of American rocketry, one of the first rocketeers, incredible, and one of the foundational minds in rocketry. And he's a huge STEM success story for the breakthrough technologies he developed.
Darren, these breakthrough technologies have been critical to us in facing our adversaries who have numerical superiority. Technologies like ICBMs, stealth, precision-guided munitions. Now, some of these technologies have actually benefited all of us. Technologies like the pressurized cabins that we enjoy in a modern airliner to things of much greater importance like GPS and the internet. Now, it's crucial that we have a steady stream of STEM-educated people in order to develop the next generation of these breakthrough technologies. And our next speaker, Brian Mitchell, is a STEM pipeline coordinator, and he's ensuring that we have a steady stream of folks who are educated in STEM. So please help me welcome Brian to the stage and hear how he is inspiring our next generation of scientists and engineers.
This building that we're in is possible because of engineering. The lights, the air conditioning, the seats, the carpet, the stage, our clothes, all possible because of science and engineering. Your food is safe because of science, and your ability to cook it is because of engineers who figured out how to make the delivery of electricity to your home safe, reliable, and cheap. Even if you woke up this morning and decided to cook your breakfast over an open fire in the backyard, unless you used a couple of pieces of wood and some vines to generate the heat to ignite the kindling, you used science to cook your breakfast. Science, technology, engineering, and math are everywhere. We shorten it to STEM, which actually makes it lose some of its impact. It becomes just an acronym instead of what it truly is: 4 critical things that are necessary for us to function. In fact, a world without science, engineering, and math, along with things like machining and welding, would undoubtedly be full of naked people standing around in fields hungry. So if it's so important, if science and engineering and technology and math are so important to our daily lives, then it must be an incredible priority. And yet, we're just simply not getting enough students into the STEM pipeline. As of 2019, 56% of 4th graders, 66% of 8th graders, and 76% of 12th graders were not proficient in math. That means they couldn't use math for simple problem solving. It doesn't get any better for science. 2/3 of 4th graders, 2/3 of 8th graders, and over 3/4 of 12th graders were not proficient in science. And as Dirty Jobs Mike Rowe will tell you, there are over 7 million skilled trades jobs unfilled because they can't find the people to do the work. That's plumbers and electricians and HVAC. It's also the incredibly skilled welders that keep ships from sinking and the technicians who keep the surgical robots in our hospitals running so doctors can perform life-saving surgeries. We have to invigorate a STEM literate society. We need creators and innovators and inventors and artists. Not the kind of artists that you're thinking of, not painters or sculptors, although we need them too. I'm talking about people who create things that don't yet exist. The people who say, why don't we have this? Or I can make this better. We have to, if we are going to energize a STEM literate society, we have to create the next generation of innovators and inventors. We can't, though, do what we've always done and hope that enough kids find their way into STEM. We have to cast an incredibly wide net, and we have to focus on the families and the students that are way out on the edges of that net. And when we do that, when we cast that net and when we focus on the edges, what we're going to find are incredibly smart kids. Kids who live in small towns and big cities, rural kids and urban kids, kids who live close to you. We have to work to bring the world of STEM to those kids. We have to set them on a path that shows them that a world in STEM is exciting and thrilling, a path that shows them that they can do amazing things. There's a small town about an hour from Eglin Air Force Base called Sneads. We had a team from Sneads competing in a robotics competition, and one of the teachers gave us some background on Sneads. She said, if you're a kid growing up in Sneeds, you have about 5 choices. You can work on a farm. You can work in the service industry that supports the farm. You can work in the jail, or you can be in the jail. The 5th choice is to leave, which is what a lot of kids do. And that means that Sneeds gets smaller. And that means that the opportunities start to shrink. And that means more kids leave. Now, our job is not to save Sneeds, Florida, but there's talent there. There's smart kids in Sneeds. There's smart kids in Quincy and Marianna and Laurel Hill and Baker and Holt and small towns around where you live too. We have to work to find those kids and bring the world of science and technology and engineering and math to them and make that kind of work so incredibly cool that they can't think of anything else that they would rather do. That spark that ignites their passion and makes them think not just, wow, that's cool, but wow, I want to do that. If we can make that happen, if we can find the things that get these kids to jump out of their chairs and get excited about math and chemistry and physics and biology, they will find their way down the path they need to go, especially if we help light the way. How, though, do we do that? Well, first, what I'm asking from you is to sign up for the long game, because the seeds that we plant today could take decades to bear fruit. The reality is, if we're going to need a bunch of people with PhDs in science and engineering and math, along with incredibly skilled technicians in 20 years, those people are 5th graders today. And the gap between a 5th grader and a PhD is somewhat large. Here's some things that you can do. Does your son or daughter or grandkids or niece or nephew's school have a FIRST robotics team? Do they need coaches or mentors or any kind of volunteer? But Mitch, I don't know anything about robotics. You don't have to. You can be a judge or a referee. You can help teach them how to present, or you can help them come up with their next incredible project. Check with your local Boys and Girls Club and find out what kind of STEM programming they have and see if they need any volunteers. Do you have a local science museum? Go there. Take your kids, take your grandkids, take your nieces and nephews. Talk to the people that work there and find out what kind of help they need from the community. Do you know how to weld? The Scouts have a merit badge for welding. Find out if you can help teach Scouts how to weld. Does your local library have any STEM programming? If not, why not? Find out if there's anything that you can do to help. It takes people, passionate people who truly want to move the needle on the number of kids who are going into STEM. People who want to truly change the direction of a child's life. Each of us has a person that set us on the path that we've followed in our lives. Maybe a parent, a teacher, an aunt, a family friend, a coach, a mentor, maybe a volunteer at a robotics or a science competition. You have the opportunity to be that person over and over and over again. You can help create a future for a child that didn't even know they had one. It takes effort and energy. It takes people like you who are invested in this for the long term. It needs you. It needs us, each and every one of us. I challenge you to go into your organizations and talk to your colleagues about ways that you can help create innovators and inventors. If you're an employee, go to your leadership and talk to them about ways that you can impact your community. If you're a leader, I ask you to listen when your employees come to you with some crazy idea of how they want to help STEM in the community. In fact, I urge you to create an environment that encourages those crazy ideas. Research into things like AI, understanding microbes, keeping satellites safe, new, safer propellants, human autonomy, research in the South Pole, and ways that we can better treat the mental health of our medics, nurses, and docs are ways that AFRL is changing the Air Force and Space Force today. Imagine what would happen if we all put our energy toward creating the next generation of innovators, creators, inventors, and artists. If we do it right, we can change the world. Thank you.
Thanks, brother. Well, Jeff, it's that time. All good things must come to an end, and today's show is no different. Thank you for joining us, everyone, as we've explored the past and glimpsed into the future, and we hope you've enjoyed the journey. Today's speakers have shown how critical science and technology is to the Air Force, and how AFRL has our Air and Space Force needs covered. Today's speakers have shown how our researchers travel to extreme locations in the name of science, address key warfighter needs, think outside the box, and are positioning the Air and Space Force for continued success in the future.
Well, you know, Dr. Raspa and I have had a really fun time joking around and kidding about some things that are actually pretty serious. But all levity aside, after listening to our speakers today, it is so easy to see just how proud we all are being part of AFRL. We're part of this continuum. Incredible things have happened in the past. You heard today, they're happening right now. And undoubtedly, there will be amazing breakthroughs in the future. And likely some of those will be by some of our AFRL colleagues listening today. Now, our talented professionals will continue to lead the Department of the Air Force in science and technology now and into the future. Now, the speakers you listened today are just a handful of the thousands of brilliant people that make up AFRL. We truly hope that we've inspired you to join us and contribute to this incredible and exciting journey. And with some closing thoughts, I'd like to welcome back to our stage our commander, Major General Heather Pringle.
Wow, what an incredible afternoon. I have enjoyed every minute of it. I learned a lot, I laughed a lot, shed a tear here and there, and boy, am I moved to act. So first and foremost, let's give a huge round of applause for all our speakers today for the effort they put in and for giving their time and their dedication and their passion, sharing their passion with all of us. Let's give them a round of applause. Woo-hoo. All right, it's a standing ovation. Nicely done. I couldn't be prouder, could not be prouder. It was it's a small room here, but every single seat was, you know, we were all standing, so well done. I think as well that this was a unique opportunity to leverage our historians. How do you think they did? Oh yeah! Woo! I will demonstrate what Chief Fitch just did. That was great. Well deserved. I think you hit a new high mark. It was very informative, very entertaining, and appreciate everything that you did, all the hours you spent practicing, and simply phenomenal job. I also need to thank who's behind the scenes, the people that set up the stage, the people that were coaching our speakers, writing scripts, advertising, sharing this invitation with our moms and our dads, our loved ones out there far and wide, and making sure that there wasn't a technical glitch as we made it through this difficult afternoon with getting us all together virtually. So a huge hats off to our public affairs team and all the support that they had with it. All right. And this is where our speakers were showing their appreciation, so thank you all. So, boy, are we fortunate to be a part of this team. I think you captured it perfectly, Jeff. This mission that AFRL has is the envy of every single person in our Air Force and our Space Force. We are so lucky to be advancing the state of the art in science and technology and innovation, and all for a common purpose. No matter the diversity of the speeches that you heard today and the discussion that we had about history and our future, it's a common purpose. It's a common goal to keep our nation free. I am so proud to be a part of this team. I'm so proud of each and every one of you. No matter what you do on a day-to-day basis, it's all making us freer and securing our future. So thank you, each and every one. Are you guys coming back up for any closing remarks? Okay, so I am the last person on the stage, but we're all headed to TJ Chumps afterwards. So if you're in the local area, you can celebrate with our fantastic speakers. But thanks for what you do each and every day. Have a safe and wonderful afternoon. I look forward to this again next year. Out here.